The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the quiet suburban streets. Maya Carter adjusted her backpack straps as she walked along the sidewalk, her sneakers scuffing softly against the pavement. She was humming a tune from one of her favorite songs, the sound muffled slightly by the earbuds tucked snugly into her ears. The library had been her refuge for the past few hours, a place where she could escape the noise of the world and focus on her schoolwork. Now, with her books safely packed away, she was heading home. Maya lived in a neighborhood that some people called the other side of town. It wasn't fancy or flashy, but it was hers. The houses were modest, their yards dotted with patches of green grass and occasional flower beds. Streetlights flickered to life as dusk settled in, bathing the area in soft yellow light. To Maya, it felt safe, familiar, but not everyone saw it that way. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Inside sat Officer Greg Dawson, a man whose career spanned nearly 2 decades. He'd started out idealistic, believing he could make a difference. But years of dealing with difficult situations and being surrounded by colleagues who shared his biases had hardened him. Over time, Dawson had come to believe certain things about people based on where they lived, how they dressed, or the color of their skin. Tonight, as his eyes landed on Maya, those beliefs took hold. Dawson watched, the teenager through his windshield. She looked ordinary enough, young, maybe 16 or 17, wearing jeans and a hoodie. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she carried a backpack slung over one shoulder. Nothing unusual, really. But something about her made Dawson uneasy. Maybe it was the way she walked, head down, lost in thought. Or maybe it was the fact that she was alone after dark in this part of town. Whatever it was, Dawson decided she needed to be checked out. He eased the cruiser to the curb ahead of her and stepped out, his heavy boots thudding against the asphalt. "Hey," he called out, raising a hand to get her attention. "You there. Stop right there." Maya froze mid-step, startled. She pulled one earbud out and turned toward the sound of his voice. When she saw the uniform, her heart skipped a beat. What did he want? She hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she forced herself to stay calm. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "Where are you coming from?" Dawson asked, his tone sharp and demanding. He moved closer, his flashlight beam sweeping over her face and then down to her backpack. "The library," Maya replied, gesturing vaguely behind her. "I was studying." "Studying? Huh?" Dawson repeated, skepticism dripping from his words. "What's your name?" "Maya Carter." She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, clutching the strap of her backpack tighter. "Can I go now? My mom's waiting for me." "Not so fast," Dawson said, ignoring her request. "Let me see some ID." Maya blinked, confused. Why would he need to see her ID? She didn't have it with her. It was at home, tucked away in a drawer like always. "I don't have it," she admitted. "But I live just a few blocks away. I'm not lying." Dawson frowned, his jaw tightening. To him, her lack of ID confirmed his suspicions. If she were innocent, she'd have no reason to refuse. "You know what happens when someone doesn't cooperate?" he said, stepping even closer. His shadow loomed large in the dim light, making Maya feel smaller than ever. "I'm not refusing," she stammered, taking a step back. "I told you I don't carry my ID with me. Please, I'm just trying to get home." But Dawson wasn't listening anymore. In his mind, her hesitation was proof of guilt. Without another word, he reached for the leash clipped to his belt. 2 German shepherds sat obediently in the back seat of his cruiser, trained to respond to his commands. With a quick tug, he opened the door and released them. Maya's eyes widened in terror as the dogs bounded toward her, their teeth bared and growls rumbling deep in their throats. She tried to run, but it was too late. One of the animals lunged, sinking its teeth into her leg. Pain shot through her body as she fell to the ground, crying out for help. The second dog joined in, biting her arm as she instinctively raised it to protect her face. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some shouted at Dawson to call off the dogs, while others filmed the scene with their phones. By the time the animals finally backed off, Maya lay curled on the ground, trembling and bleeding. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she gasped for breath, unable to comprehend why this was happening. Dawson stood nearby, watching impassively as backup officers arrived. They cuffed Maya's hands behind her back, claiming it was for her own safety. She protested weakly, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong, but her voice went unheard. As the paramedics loaded her into an ambulance, the footage of the attack spread like wildfire online. Within minutes, hashtags calling for justice for Maya were trending nationwide. Back at the station, Dawson typed up his report, painting himself as the hero who stopped a suspicious individual acting strangely in a high-crime area. He knew his version of events wouldn't hold up forever, not with video evidence floating around, but he figured his badge would protect him. After all, it always had before. What Dawson didn't know was that Maya's father, Marcus Carter, was already watching the video. A retired Marine Corps colonel with a reputation for precision and discipline, Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. His daughter, his bright, kind-hearted girl, was screaming in pain, while a man in uniform stood idly by. Anger surged through him, hot and unrelenting. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of something much bigger, something deeply ingrained in society. And Marcus vowed then and there that he wouldn't let it slide, not this time. As the night wore on, Maya lay in a hospital bed, her wounds bandaged and her spirit battered. Around her, machines beeped steadily, monitoring her vitals. Outside, protests erupted in the streets, voices rising in anger and sorrow. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, though no one yet knew just how far they would go, or how personal this fight would become. By morning, the video of Officer Greg Dawson releasing his K-9 unit on Maya Carter had spread across social media like wildfire. People couldn't stop talking about it. The footage showed every detail: the teenager's fear, the dogs attacking, and Dawson standing by without stopping them. It was hard to watch, but impossible to ignore. Comments poured in from all over the country, some expressing outrage, others sharing their own stories of mistreatment by law enforcement. Hashtags like "Justice for Maya" and "Enough is enough" began trending, drawing attention not just to this one incident, but to a much larger issue. Marcus Carter sat at his kitchen table, his phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. Friends, family members, and even strangers were reaching out, offering support or simply expressing their shock. But Marcus wasn't focused on the messages. His eyes were glued to the screen as he replayed the video again and again. Each time, his chest tightened a little more. He clenched his fist so hard that his knuckles turned white. This wasn't just an attack on his daughter. It felt like an attack on everything he stood for. Marcus had spent years serving his country in the Marine Corps, where honor and integrity were drilled into him daily. After retiring, he started a private security firm, working with high-profile clients who trusted him to protect what mattered most to them. Now, as he watched the video, he realized he hadn't been there to protect what mattered most to him: his family. That realization burned deep inside him, fueling a fire that wouldn't be extinguished until justice was served. Later that day, Marcus visited the hospital to see Maya. She looked small lying in the bed, her arms and legs wrapped in bandages. Her face was pale, and dark circles ringed her eyes. When she saw her father walk in, she tried to smile, but it came out weak and shaky. "Dad," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. Marcus pulled up a chair beside her bed and took her hand gently. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, keeping his tone calm despite the storm raging inside him. "How are you feeling?" "Okay, I guess," Maya replied, though her red-rimmed eyes told a different story. "It still hurts." "I know it does," Marcus said, squeezing her hand. "But you're strong, Maya, stronger than anyone I know, and we're going to get through this together." Maya nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why did he do it, Dad? What did I do wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said firmly. "This isn't about you. It's about him." and the people who let him think he can treat others this way. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, okay? I promise you that. Maya wiped her tears and nodded again. For the first time since the attack, she felt a flicker of hope. If anyone could fix this, it was her dad. Back home, Marcus got to work. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, especially when dealing with a system that often protected its own. But Marcus had connections, people he'd worked with during his time in the military and afterward. One of those people was Ryan Ellis, a tech expert who specialized in uncovering hidden information. Ryan had helped Marcus before on sensitive cases, and Marcus trusted him completely. He called Ryan that evening, explaining the situation and asking for his help. I need to know everything about this guy, Marcus said, his voice low but intense. His record, his superiors, any dirt we can find, anything that'll hold up in court. Ryan agreed immediately. Consider it done, he said. Give me a day or two and I'll dig up whatever's out there. The next person Marcus reached out to was Chris Lane, a former Navy SEAL he'd served with in the Marines. Chris was tough, smart, and fiercely loyal. More importantly, he understood the kind of discipline and strategy needed for situations like this. When Marcus explained what happened to Maya, Chris didn't hesitate. You've got my full support, he said. Tell me what you need. With Ryan and Chris on board, Marcus began piecing together a plan. They would gather evidence, build a case, and expose not just Officer Dawson, but the entire system enabling him. It wouldn't be quick or simple, but Marcus was determined to see it through. Meanwhile, Officer Dawson was starting to feel the pressure. News outlets were calling him out by name, and angry protesters had gathered outside the police station demanding answers. His colleagues, who once backed him without question, now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Even his superiors seemed uneasy, issuing vague statements about reviewing the situation, while distancing themselves from him publicly. Dawson tried to defend himself, insisting he'd followed protocol and acted on instinct. She was suspicious, he told anyone who would listen. You don't just let someone like that walk away. But his excuses fell flat, drowned out by the growing chorus of voices calling for accountability. At home, Dawson paced back and forth, his mind racing. He knew the video made him look bad, worse than bad, but he convinced himself it was all a misunderstanding. Surely someone would step in and clear his name. After all, hadn't they always done so in the past? Yet as the days passed and the criticism mounted, doubt crept in. For the first time in his career, Dawson wondered if he might actually face consequences for his actions. One evening, as Marcus scrolled through documents Ryan had sent him, something caught his eye. Among the files was an email chain between Dawson and several higher-ranking officers. In the emails, they discussed ways to handle complaints from minority communities, using coded language to avoid outright admitting wrongdoing. One message stood out in particular. If these troublemakers keep causing problems, we may need to take stronger measures. Marcus stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about an entire system designed to protect people like Dawson. It made him sick to his stomach, but it also strengthened his resolve. He forwarded the emails to Ryan and Chris along with a note. This is bigger than we thought. We need to bring them all down. As the investigation continued, Marcus kept checking in on Maya. She was healing slowly, both physically and emotionally, but the scars ran deep. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night, shaking from nightmares about the attack. Other times she refused to leave the house, afraid of running into another officer like Dawson. Marcus hated seeing her this way, but he reminded her constantly that she wasn't alone. We're fighting for you, he told her, and we're going to win. Outside, the movement for justice grew louder. Community leaders organized rallies, drawing hundreds of people to the streets. Speakers shared stories of similar encounters with law enforcement, highlighting the pattern of abuse and neglect. Local activists pushed for reforms, demanding changes to policies that allowed officers like Dawson to act with impunity. The pressure was mounting, not just on Dawson, but on everyone involved. Marcus watched it all unfold, proud of how far they'd come, but aware there was still much to do. He knew the fight wouldn't end overnight, but he also knew they were making progress. With each new piece of evidence, each new voice joining the cause, the walls protecting Dawson and his allies began to crack. Late one night, Marcus sat alone in his study, staring at the stack of papers in front of him. The weight of everything rested heavily on his shoulders, but he refused to give in to despair. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. A memory surfaced. Maya as a little girl, laughing as she chased butterflies in the backyard. She'd been so full of joy then, unburdened by the world's cruelty. That image gave Marcus strength. No matter what it took, he would fight to restore that joy, to ensure Maya, and countless others like her, could live without fear. The battle was far from over, but Marcus was ready. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, armed with determination and love for his daughter. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus Carter's investigation into Officer Greg Dawson and the police department grew more intense. He spent hours poring over documents, emails, and reports that Ryan Ellis had uncovered. Each new piece of evidence painted a clearer picture, not just of Dawson's actions, but of the system that allowed them to happen. It was worse than Marcus had imagined. The emails revealed a pattern of behavior, not just from Dawson, but from several officers who saw themselves as untouchable. They joked about handling complaints from minority communities and discussed ways to silence anyone who dared speak out. Ryan called Marcus one evening with even more troubling news. "I found something big," Ryan said, his voice low and urgent. "There's a file on the department server, a list of incidents involving excessive force. Guess whose name shows up the most?" Marcus didn't need to ask. "Dawson," he said grimly. "Yeah," Ryan confirmed. "And get this, his superiors knew about every single one. They covered it up, blamed the victims, or swept it under the rug. There are memos suggesting they even coached officers on how to avoid accountability." Marcus clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. He thanked Ryan and hung up, staring at the wall as he processed the information. This wasn't just about one bad cop anymore. It was about an entire culture of corruption. The realization hit him hard. How many others had suffered because of people like Dawson? How many lives had been ruined while those in power looked the other way? Later that night, Marcus met Chris Lane at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. They sat in a corner booth away from prying eyes, discussing their next move. Chris listened intently as Marcus laid out what they'd discovered so far. When Marcus finished, Chris leaned back in his seat, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "This is bigger than we thought," Chris said finally. "If we want to take them down, we'll need more than just evidence. We'll need proof that can't be ignored." "I know," Marcus replied. "That's why I'm thinking we go straight to the source. Dawson knows things he won't admit unless we push him. If we can get him to talk, we might have enough to bring down the whole department." Chris nodded slowly. "It's risky, but it could work. Just tell me what you need me to do." The plan began to take shape. Marcus would confront Dawson directly, using whatever means necessary to make him confess. Chris would handle logistics, ensuring they had backup if things went sideways. Ryan, meanwhile, would continue digging for anything else that might strengthen their case. It was a dangerous game, but Marcus knew they had no choice. Justice wouldn't come easily, not against a system designed to protect itself. Officer. Dawson, meanwhile, was unraveling. The mounting pressure from public outrage and internal investigations left him paranoid and restless. He barely slept, haunted by visions of angry crowds shouting his name and accusing fingers pointed in his direction. His colleagues, once loyal allies, now avoided him altogether. Even his wife seemed distant, unable to look him in the eye without judgment. One evening, as Dawson sat alone in his dimly lit living room, his phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Social media was ablaze with calls for his arrest, and news outlets kept running stories about the attack on Maya. Every headline felt like another nail in his coffin. Desperate to escape the scrutiny, Dawson decided to lay low for a while. He packed a bag, loaded his car, and drove to a remote cabin he owned deep in the woods. It was a place he rarely visited, but it offered the isolation he craved. Unbeknownst to Dawson, Marcus and Chris were already tracking his movements. Using GPS data and surveillance footage, Ryan pinpointed Dawson's location within hours of his departure. By morning, Marcus and Chris were preparing for the confrontation. They armed themselves not with weapons, but with tools to capture the truth: cameras, recording devices, and the damning evidence they'd gathered so far. The drive to the cabin was long and tense. Neither Marcus nor Chris spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the secluded property, the dense trees blocked out most of the sunlight, casting eerie shadows across the narrow dirt road. When they finally arrived, they parked a safe distance away and approached on foot, careful not to alert Dawson. Inside the cabin, Dawson paced nervously, clutching a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He jumped at every creak of the wooden floorboards, convinced someone was coming for him. His paranoia reached a fever pitch when he heard footsteps outside. Grabbing a flashlight, he crept toward the door, heart pounding in his chest. Marcus stepped into view first, his expression calm but resolute. Chris followed close behind, carrying a small camera mounted on a tripod. Dawson froze, his face pale with shock. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "You can't just barge in like this." "We're not here to hurt you," Marcus said evenly. "We're here to talk." "Talk?" Dawson scoffed very weakly, though fear flickered in his eyes. "About what? You've already ruined my life." "No," Marcus corrected him sharply. "You did that yourself. But tonight you're going to tell us everything. The truth about what happened to my daughter and the truth about the people protecting you." Dawson shook his head frantically. "I don't know what you're talking about. I followed procedure. That girl, she was suspicious." Marcus stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Suspicious? Because she was walking home from the library? Because she lives in a neighborhood you don't understand? Or because of the color of her skin?" Dawson opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus cut him off. "Save it. We know what you've done. And we know your bosses helped cover it up. But tonight you're going to admit it. All of it." Chris set up the camera, making sure it captured both men clearly. Then he pressed record and nodded at Marcus. For the next hour, Marcus played the video of the attack on Maya repeatedly, forcing Dawson to watch. He showed him the emails, the incident reports, the patterns of abuse documented over years. With each revelation, Dawson grew visibly more agitated, sweat dripping down his face. Finally, it became too much. Dawson collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Okay, he cried, his voice breaking. "I messed up, all right? I thought I was doing my job. They told me." "They told you what?" Marcus pressed, leaning forward. "Who told you? Who gave you permission to treat innocent people like criminals?" Dawson hesitated, tears streaming down his cheeks. "The chief," he admitted. He said we needed to send a message. Show them we're in charge." Marcus exchanged a glance with Chris. They had what they came for. Dawson's confession was recorded undeniable proof of his guilt, and the guilt of those above him. Without another word, Marcus and Chris gathered their equipment and left the cabin, leaving Dawson alone with his shame. Back in town, the team wasted no time. Ryan uploaded the confession online, along with the rest of the evidence they'd collected. Within hours, the story exploded. News stations picked it up, broadcasting Dawson's admission to millions of viewers. Protesters flooded the streets again, demanding immediate action. The police chief resigned under pressure, and Internal Affairs launched a full-scale investigation into the department. For Marcus, it was only the beginning. He knew the fight for justice wouldn't end with Dawson's downfall, but as he sat beside Maya's hospital bed later that night, holding her hand, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They'd taken the first step, a big one, and they weren't stopping anytime soon. The fallout from Officer Greg Dawson's confession was swift and devastating. By morning, the video of his tearful admission had been viewed millions of times. News anchors talked about little else, dissecting every word he said and connecting it to the larger issue of systemic racism in law enforcement. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters, chanting slogans like, "No justice, no peace," and holding signs with Maya's name. The pressure on local authorities became unbearable. Inside the police department, chaos reigned. Officers whispered nervously in hallways, unsure who might be implicated next. Files were shredded, emails deleted, and memos destroyed in a desperate attempt to cover tracks. But it was too late. Marcus Carter and his team had already exposed enough evidence to ensure accountability couldn't be avoided. Internal affairs investigators combed through decades of records, uncovering patterns of misconduct that stretched far beyond Dawson. Names of officers, and even higher-ranking officials, began appearing in headlines as the scandal deepened. For Marcus, this was both satisfying and infuriating. On one hand, he was glad to see the truth coming to light. On the other, he knew how much damage had been done over the years, not just to Maya, but to countless others who never got justice. He spent hours sitting at his desk, staring at the stack of documents Ryan Ellis had sent him. Each page represented someone's pain, someone's shattered trust in the system meant to protect them. Maya, meanwhile, was slowly starting to heal. Her physical wounds were improving, though scars remained as reminders of the attack. Emotionally, however, she still struggled. Nightmares plagued her sleep, and she often felt anxious leaving the house. Despite this, she found strength in the outpouring of support from her community. Friends visited her regularly, bringing cards and flowers. Strangers sent messages online, thanking her for speaking out and sharing their own stories of mistreatment by police. For the first time since the incident, Maya began to feel less alone. One afternoon, while flipping through social media, Maya stumbled upon a post from a young woman named Lisa. In the caption, Lisa wrote about being stopped by police simply for walking home late at night, just like Maya had been. She described feeling terrified and powerless, unsure if she'd make it home safely. Below the caption was a photo of Lisa holding a sign that read, "I am Maya Carter." Tears filled Maya's eyes as she scrolled further, finding dozens of similar posts from people across the country. It dawned on her that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone fighting for change. Inspired, Maya decided to join the movement. With her father's encouragement, she began posting videos online, sharing her experience and calling for reform. At first, she spoke hesitantly, unsure how her words would be received. But as comments poured in, messages of gratitude, solidarity, and hope, she grew more confident. Her voice became a rallying cry for those demanding accountability and transparency in law enforcement. Marcus watched proudly as his daughter found her footing. He knew it wouldn't be easy for her, but he also knew she was stronger than she realized. One evening after Maya recorded a particularly powerful video, Marcus sat down beside her on the couch. "You're doing something amazing," he told her softly. "Not just for yourself, but for so many others." Maya smiled faintly, though her eyes still held traces of sadness. "I just want things to be different," she said. "I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did." "They won't," Marcus promised. "Not if we keep pushing, not if we keep fighting." While Maya focused on raising awareness, Marcus turned his attention to the legal battle ahead. Dawson had been arrested shortly after his confession, charged with multiple counts of assault, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. His superiors weren't far behind. Several high-ranking officers faced investigations, and some had already been suspended pending trial. Yet Marcus knew convictions wouldn't come easily. The defense would argue technicalities, question the validity of evidence, and try to paint Dawson as a scapegoat for larger societal issues. To prepare, Marcus enlisted the help of a lawyer named Angela Hayes, known for her work on civil rights cases. Angela was sharp, compassionate, and relentless, a perfect ally in their fight for justice. Together, they reviewed every piece of evidence, strategizing ways to present it in court. Chris Lane accompanied Marcus to meetings, offering insights from his military background. Even Ryan Ellis pitched in, using his tech skills to organize files and create visual presentations that would leave jurors no room for doubt. As the trial date approached, tensions ran high. Dawson's attorneys launched a public relations campaign, portraying him as a well-meaning officer caught up in a politically charged environment. They claimed he'd acted under orders, shifting blame onto the department's leadership. Meanwhile, supporters of the police force argued that incidents like these were rare exceptions, not indicative of widespread problems. Marcus knew better. He'd seen the emails, the reports, the patterns of behavior. This wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a toxic culture that needed to be dismantled. On the day of the trial, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters packed the benches, cameras flashing as witnesses took the stand. Maya sat beside her father, gripping his hand tightly. She'd agreed to testify despite her fear, because she believed it was important. When her turn came, she walked to the witness box, her heart pounding. As she recounted the events of that night, the fear, the pain, the helplessness, tears streamed down her face. But she didn't falter. Her voice remained steady, carrying the weight of truth. Dawson sat slumped in his chair, avoiding eye contact. Gone was the arrogant man who once stood over Maya with indifference. In his place was a broken individual, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. When it was his turn to speak, he admitted his wrongdoing, echoing the confession Marcus had recorded. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I let my biases get the better of me. I hurt an innocent girl, and I'll live with that regret for the rest of my life." The judge listened carefully, taking notes as each side presented its case. After days of testimony, closing arguments, and deliberation, the verdict finally arrived. Dawson was found guilty on all charges. Cheers erupted in the courtroom, though Maya remained silent, her expression unreadable. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase what had happened. For her, the real victory lay in the changes sparked by her courage, the reforms being discussed, the conversations happening nationwide, the growing demand for accountability. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Marcus and Maya, asking for statements. Marcus stepped forward, his voice firm and clear. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's only the beginning. We've taken down one bad actor, but there's still work to be done. We need to fix the system so no one else has to go through what my daughter did." Maya nodded, stepping beside her father. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "And neither should you be. Together, we can make things better." As they walked away from the courthouse, hand in hand, the crowd cheered again. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for posterity. Behind them, Chris and Angela exchanged smiles, knowing they'd played a part in something monumental. Ryan, watching from afar, gave a small nod of approval. They'd fought hard, and they'd won, but the war was far from over. That night, Marcus sat alone in his study, reflecting on everything that had happened. The road ahead would still be difficult, filled with obstacles and resistance. But for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a sense of hope. Change was possible, and with people like Maya leading the charge, it was inevitable. He picked up his phone and opened a message thread with Chris, Ryan, and Angela. Typing quickly, he wrote, "Phase 1 complete. Let's start planning Phase 2. The reply came almost instantly. "Already on it." Marcus smiled faintly, setting the phone down. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, he could rest knowing they'd made a difference. Not just for Maya, but for everyone counting on them to keep going. The victory in court was a turning point, but it didn't bring the closure many had hoped for. Officer Greg Dawson's guilty verdict sent shockwaves through the community and beyond, sparking debates about accountability and reform. While some celebrated the outcome as a step toward justice, others saw it as merely scratching the surface of a much deeper issue. For Marcus Carter and his team, the trial was just one battle in a larger war. a fight that required constant vigilance and unwavering determination. In the weeks following the verdict, the town became a hub of activity. Activists organized forums, workshops and rallies aimed at addressing systemic racism within law enforcement. Community leaders invited experts to speak about policing practices, racial profiling, and ways to rebuild trust between officers and the people they served. At the center of these efforts was Maya Carter, whose courage inspired countless others to join the cause. Her story had become a symbol of resilience, proof that even in the face of injustice, change was possible. Marcus watched with pride as Maya stepped into her role as an advocate. She spoke at schools, attended meetings, and participated in panel discussions alongside activists and scholars. Though she still felt nervous at times, especially when speaking to large crowds, she pushed through her fears because she believed in the importance of her message. "If I stay quiet," she often said, "nothing will ever change." One evening, after a particularly emotional event where Maya shared her experience with a group of teenagers, Marcus pulled her aside. "You're amazing, you know that?" he told her, his voice filled with admiration. "Not everyone has the strength to do what you're doing." Maya shrugged, brushing off the compliment. "I'm not doing anything special," she replied. "I'm just telling the truth." "That's exactly why it's special," Marcus said firmly. "People need to hear it. They need to see someone like you standing up and saying enough is enough." Despite their progress, challenges remained. The police department resisted calls for reform, arguing that sweeping changes would undermine their ability to maintain order. Some officers resented the scrutiny, feeling unfairly targeted by critics who painted them all as villains. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. To address these concerns, Marcus and Angela Hayes worked tirelessly to draft proposals for meaningful reform. They suggested measures such as mandatory de-escalation training, independent oversight boards, and stricter consequences for misconduct. Ryan Ellis used his tech skills to create data visualizations, showing how similar reforms had reduced incidents of excessive force in other cities. Chris Lane reached out to former colleagues in law enforcement, seeking input from those willing to support change. Together, they built a comprehensive plan designed to protect both citizens and officers. But implementing these ideas wouldn't be easy. Local officials dragged their feet, claiming budget constraints or questioning the feasibility of certain measures. Behind closed doors, powerful figures lobbied against the proposals, warning of potential backlash if reforms were pushed too quickly. Frustrated but undeterred, Marcus decided to take the fight directly to the people. He organized a town hall meeting, inviting residents to share their thoughts and concerns about policing in the community. The turnout was overwhelming. Hundreds of people packed into the high school auditorium, filling every seat and spilling into the aisles. Speakers ranged from victims of police brutality to retired officers calling for accountability. One woman recounted how her son had been wrongfully arrested. Another described being harassed during a routine traffic stop. Each story added weight to the growing demand for action. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood at the podium, his presence commanding yet calm. "We've heard your voices tonight," he began, scanning the crowd. "And we know what needs to happen next. This isn't about punishing every officer. It's about creating a system that works for everyone. A system where no child has to fear walking home, where no parent has to wonder if their loved ones will come back safe." Applause erupted, echoing through the room. Marcus continued, outlining the specific reforms they were proposing and urging attendees to contact local representatives in support of the changes. By the end of the meeting, volunteers had formed committees to keep the momentum going. It was clear that the movement wasn't slowing down anytime soon. Meanwhile, Maya found herself at the heart of a growing network of young activists. Through social media, she connected with teens across the country who were organizing protests, writing letters to lawmakers, and educating their peers about racial justice. Together, they launched a campaign called Noshing Safe Streets for All, using art, music, and storytelling to amplify their message. Maya's confidence grew with each new connection, and she began dreaming of a future where equality wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. Back at home, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Maya started attending school again, cautiously, stepping back into routines she'd abandoned after the attack. Friends rallied around her, offering support and encouragement. Teachers praised her resilience, and classmates looked up to her as a leader. Though reminders of the past lingered, flinches at sudden noises, moments of panic when passing a police car, Maya learned to navigate them with patience and self-care. Marcus, too, began to reflect on the journey so far. Late at night, he often sat in his study, flipping through old photos of Maya as a child. Those images reminded him of why he'd fought so hard, not just for justice, but for the chance to give his daughter a brighter future. He thought about the sacrifices they'd made, the sleepless nights, the endless hours spent strategizing and planning. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, he felt a deep sense of purpose knowing they were making a difference. One day, while scrolling through news articles, Marcus came across a headline that caught his attention. National Police Reform. Bill gains momentum. Intrigued, he clicked the link and read about lawmakers introducing legislation inspired by grassroots movements like the one in their town. The bill included many of the reforms Marcus and his team had proposed, from increased transparency to better training programs. For the first time in months, Marcus allowed himself to feel a flicker of optimism. He called Angela immediately to share the news. "This could be it," he said excitedly. "If this passes, it'll set a precedent for the entire country." Angela agreed, though she cautioned against celebrating too soon. "It's still early days," she reminded him. "We'll need to keep pushing, keep advocating. But yes, this is a big step forward." Word spread quickly among the group. Ryan sent a text to everyone. "Looks like our work is paying off. Keep fighting." Chris responded with a thumbs-up emoji, while Maya posted a celebratory update on social media. The sense of accomplishment was palpable, a reminder of how far they'd come since that fateful night. As weeks turned into months, the movement gained even more traction. Celebrities lent their voices to the cause, amplifying calls for reform. Journalists covered success stories from towns implementing new policies, highlighting the positive impact on both officers and communities. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. People started recognizing that real change required effort from everyone, not just activists, but lawmakers, educators, business owners, and ordinary citizens. Through it all, Marcus and Maya remained steadfast. They attended conferences, gave interviews, and collaborated with organizations working toward similar goals. Their bond grew stronger with each challenge they faced, united by a shared vision of a fairer, kinder world. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Maya turned to her father. "Do you think we'll ever really fix everything?" she asked quietly. Marcus considered the question for a moment before answering. "Probably not completely," he admitted. "There will always be problems to solve, injustices to fight, but that doesn't mean we give up. Every little bit helps. Every voice matters." Maya nodded thoughtfully, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Then I guess we're not done yet." "No," Marcus said with a chuckle. "We're definitely not done yet." And with that, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky fade from orange to purple. The journey wasn't over, but they knew they were moving in the right direction, one step at a time. Months had passed since the trial, and life in the small suburban town began to settle into a new rhythm. The scars of the past were still visible, both in Maya's bandaged arms and in the lingering mistrust between the community and law enforcement. But there was also a sense of hope. The movement for reform had grown beyond what anyone could have imagined, spreading far beyond the borders of their town and reaching into cities across the country. People everywhere were talking about accountability, transparency, and justice. Maya had become a central figure in this movement, her name synonymous with courage and resilience. She traveled to neighboring towns, speaking at rallies and community meetings. Her speeches weren't polished or rehearsed. They came straight from the heart, raw and honest. She talked about fear, the kind that grips you when you're walking home alone and see flashing lights behind you. She talked about pain, not just the physical wounds left by the K-9 attack, but the emotional toll of feeling powerless. And she talked about hope, the belief that things could get better if enough people cared enough to try. Her father, Marcus Carter, stood proudly beside her at every event, offering quiet support whenever she needed it. He rarely spoke during these gatherings, preferring to let Maya take the spotlight. But his presence said everything. It reminded everyone of the sacrifices he'd made, the battles he'd fought, and the unwavering love that drove him to seek justice not just for his daughter, but for all those who had been wronged. One crisp autumn morning, Maya woke up early, feeling unusually nervous. Today was different. Instead of addressing a crowd of strangers, she would be standing in front of her classmates at an assembly organized by her school. It wasn't the size of the audience that intimidated her. It was the fact that these were people she saw every day, people who knew her as just Maya, not the activist or the symbol of change. She wanted them to understand that she was still the same person, even though her life had changed forever. Marcus noticed her unease as they drove to school together. "You'll do great," he assured her, glancing over briefly before focusing back on the road. "They already respect you. This is just another chance to show them why." Maya nodded, taking a deep breath. "I just don't want to mess it up." "You won't," Marcus said firmly. "And even if you stumble, that's okay. Being brave doesn't mean never being afraid. It means doing what's right anyway." Those words stayed with her as she walked onto the stage later that morning. The auditorium buzzed with chatter until the principal introduced her, and then the room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her, some curious, others skeptical. Maya gripped the edges of the podium, steadying herself. "Hi," she began softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. Then louder. "Hi, I'm Maya Carter." A few students clapped politely, but most waited quietly, unsure what to expect. "I know some of you probably think I shouldn't be here," she continued, her tone conversational, yet sincere. "Maybe you think I'm trying to make myself seem important, or maybe you're tired of hearing about police brutality. Honestly, I get it. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't be talking about this stuff. I'm just a regular kid, you know? But here's the thing. None of us are really regular. We all carry stories inside us, whether we share them or not. And mine happens to involve something scary that happened to me." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others leaned forward intrigued. Maya pressed on. "What happened to me wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But it wasn't unique either. There are so many people out there, people just like you who've been treated unfairly because of how they look, where they live, or who they are. Maybe it hasn't happened to you personally, but chances are it's happened to someone you care about. And if we stay silent, if we pretend it's not our problem, nothing will ever change." Her voice grew stronger now, more confident. "Change starts with us. Not just adults, not just politicians, but kids too. Every time you stand up for someone who's being bullied, every time you speak out against something that's wrong, you're making a difference. You might not see it right away, but trust me, it matters." The room was completely silent now, every student hanging on her words. Maya took another deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. "I used to be scared all the time," she admitted. "Scared of walking home alone, scared of seeing police cars, scared of speaking up. But I realized something important. Fear only wins if you let it. When my dad told me we were going to fight for justice, I didn't know if we could win. But we tried anyway. And guess what? We did win. Not completely, not perfectly, but we moved the needle a little bit closer to fairness. That's all any of us can do, move the needle." By the time she finished, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Students stood, cheering and whistling, their faces filled with admiration. Maya blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the response. As she stepped off the stage, her friends rushed to hug her, telling her how proud they were. Even teachers approached her afterward, thanking her for sharing her story and inspiring others. Later that afternoon, Marcus picked her up from school, grinning as soon as he saw her. "Well?" he asked. How'd it go? Maya laughed still, buzzing from the energy of the crowd. It went amazing, better than I thought it would. I told you, Marcus said, ruffling her hair affectionately. You've got a gift, kiddo. Don't ever forget that. Back home, the sense of accomplishment was tempered by the knowledge that the work wasn't done. While significant progress had been made locally, national efforts to pass comprehensive police reform legislation were hitting roadblocks. Lawmakers debated endlessly, bogged down by partisan politics and competing interests. Activists grew frustrated, worried that momentum might fade before meaningful change could be achieved. But Marcus refused to give up. He joined forces with other advocates organizing letter-writing campaigns, phone banks, and protests to keep pressure on elected officials. Maya contributed by creating videos and social media posts encouraging young people to contact their representatives. Together they worked tirelessly, determined to hold leaders accountable. Their persistence paid off. One chilly December evening, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Marcus received a call from Angela Hayes. "It's happening," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "The bill passed. It's official." Marcus froze, stunned. For a moment he couldn't find the words. Finally he managed to choke out, "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Angela replied. "It's not perfect, but it's a huge step forward. Training programs, oversight boards, stricter accountability measures. It's all in there." Marcus thanked her profusely, hanging up quickly so he could share the news with Maya. He found her curled up on the couch reading a book. "Guess what?" he said, his grin wide enough to light up the room. "What?" Maya asked, closing her book and sitting up eagerly. "They did it," Marcus announced. "The reform bill passed, it's finally law." Maya's jaw dropped. "For real, like nationwide?" "For real," Marcus confirmed, pulling her into a tight hug. "We did it, Maya. All of us." Tears streamed down Maya's face as she hugged him back, laughing through her sobs. They sat there for a long time holding each other, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Years of hard work, sacrifice, and heartbreak had led to this, a tangible victory, proof that their efforts hadn't been in vain. That night, as they sat together watching the news coverage of the historic vote, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. From the dark days following the attack to the triumph of seeing real progress, the journey had been long and difficult. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the bond between him and Maya. Their shared mission had brought them closer than ever, strengthening their resolve and deepening their love for each other. As the clock ticked past midnight, Maya yawned, resting her head on Marcus's shoulder. "Do you think things will actually get better now?" she murmured sleepily. Marcus kissed the top of her head. "They already are," he said softly. "And they'll keep getting better as long as people like you keep fighting for what's right." Maya smiled, drifting off to sleep with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. A fresh start, a clean slate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But for tonight, they allowed themselves to rest, knowing they'd earned it.